Most people don't lose control of their lives in dramatic moments. They lose it quietly. It usually begins before the day has even started. Your alarm goes off. Your eyes open slowly, and before your feet even touch the floor, your hand is already reaching for the phone beside your bed. Not because you need it, because it has become automatic. You check one notification, then another. A message from someone you barely spoke to yesterday. A headline about a crisis happening somewhere across the world. A comment someone left under a video you posted 3 days ago. Within seconds, your mind is no longer your own. You scroll. Your brain absorbs fragments of other people's lives. Their opinions, their victories, their arguments, their frustrations, their expectations. And without realizing it, the first minutes of your morning moments that once belonged entirely to you have already been handed away. Your attention is gone. Your focus has been captured. And the strange thing is, this feels normal now. Millions of people begin their mornings exactly this way. Not with intention, not with reflection, but with reaction. Reacting to notifications, reacting to news, reacting to the agendas of other people. The day hasn't even begun, and already your attention is being pulled in 100 directions. Then you arrive at work, and the pattern continues. A meeting that accomplishes almost nothing, a co-worker complaining about office politics, notifications interrupting your concentration every few minutes. You start one task, then another, then another. You stay busy all day, but deep down, something feels wrong, because being busy is not the same as moving forward. You can run in circles for 12 hours and still end up exactly where you started. And then there is something else, something people rarely question. The talking, the endless talking. People talk about their plans before they exist. They talk about goals before they've taken the first step. They talk about ideas before those ideas have ever been tested in the real world. They announce their ambitions. They explain their intentions. They defend their decisions to people who aren't even living the life they want. And every time they do this, something subtle happens. Energy leaks away. Momentum fades. Because when you announce your intentions to the world, your brain begins to feel as if progress has already happened. Approval replaces action. Validation replaces discipline. Slowly, without noticing it, you begin living in a state of constant reaction, reacting to opinions, reacting to expectations, reacting to problems you never chose to carry. Instead of directing your life, you respond to whatever appears in front of you. And the worst part is that somewhere inside, you feel it happening. That quiet awareness, the sense that you are capable of more clarity, more control, more direction, but your focus keeps getting divided. Your time keeps slipping away. Your attention keeps scattering across things that don't truly move your life forward. And the years pass faster than you expected. Most people never stop to question this pattern. They assume this is simply how modern life works. Constant noise, constant distraction, constant réaction. But more than 2,000 years ago, long before smartphones existed, a group of philosophers discovered something powerful. They realized that the greatest threat to a person's life was not chaos. It was distraction. It was giving your attention to things that did not deserve it. It was allowing the outside world to control what should only be controlled from within. One of the men who understood this better than anyone was Marcus Aurelius. He ruled one of the most powerful empires in human history. His days were filled with war, betrayal, political conflict, and endless demands for his attention. If anyone had a reason to feel overwhelmed by external noise, It was him. And yet, in the quiet pages of his private journal, he wrote something remarkable. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Think about what that really means. Not power over events. Not power over other people. Not power over circumstances. Power over your mind. And the moment you allow the world to dictate your thoughts, your reactions, and your attention, you surrender the only power that was ever truly yours. Most people believe their biggest problem is laziness. They think if they only had more motivation or more discipline, everything would finally fall into place. But the real problem is quieter than that. Energy leakage. Your energy doesn't disappear all at once. It leaks slowly through small habits, repeated every day. And one of the biggest leaks is something modern culture encourages constantly. Talking, not meaningful conversation, not thoughtful dialogue, but endless broadcasting. Someone decides they want to get in shape. The first thing they do is announce it online. I'm starting a fitness journey. Another person decides to start a business. Before they've sold a single product, they are explaining the entire plan to anyone who will listen. It feels productive, but psychologically, something dangerous is happening. When you talk about a goal, your brain releases a small sense of reward, a feeling of completion. Your mind begins believing that progress has already begun, but the work hasn't been done. And that early reward weakens the tension that should push you into action. The Stoics noticed this long before modern psychology explained it. They saw that people who constantly talked about improvement rarely improved at all, because explanation replaced execution. Epictetus warned his students about this trap. He told them that if someone truly understands a principle, they don't rush to announce it, they live it. Talking about discipline does not create discipline. Talking about goals does not create results. Only action does. At some point in life, a realization appears. The more attention you give the outside world, the less control you seem to have over your inner one. Your mood shifts based on someone else's opinion. Your confidence rises or falls depending on how others respond to you. Your peace becomes negotiable. The Stoics recognized this pattern clearly. They realized that most suffering does not come from events themselves. It comes from how we react to them. People chase approval. They fear criticism. They defend their ego in endless arguments. And through this constant reaction, they lose the one thing that truly belongs to them: their mind. This is why Stoicism teaches something simple but powerful. Freedom does not come from controlling the world. Freedom comes from controlling yourself. The outside world will always be unpredictable, but the world inside your mind can become stable. And that stability begins when you stop giving away your attention. Modern life is designed to capture your attention. Every app, every notification, every algorithm, they are built to keep you reacting. Your attention has become a commodity. Entire industries compete for it every second of the day. Social media does not reward silence. It rewards reaction. The more you comment, argue, and broadcast your opinions, the more the system pushes your voice outward. Over time, you begin believing something dangerous, that if you are not speaking constantly, you are invisible. But the people who build meaningful lives rarely spend their time broadcasting every step. They are too busy working, while others debate online. They refine their skills. While others announce plans, they execute them. And the discipline required for that kind of focus begins with something simple: silence. Silence was never about withdrawal from the world. It was about control. Most people speak impulsively. They defend themselves immediately. They react emotionally. But Stoic discipline begins with a pause, the moment between stimulus and response. That moment contains enormous power. When anger appears, pause. When criticism appears, pause. When someone provokes you, pause. Because the first reaction rarely produces the wisest decision. Silence allows reason to appear. It allows perspective to emerge. And often, the moment you pause, you realize the argument is not worth your energy. The insult is not worth your response. And silence becomes strength. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you have nothing to prove. Once silence becomes part of your discipline, something subtle begins to change. Your energy returns. Reaction is exhausting. Every argument, every explanation, every emotional response drains mental strength. But when you stop reacting to everything, your attention becomes concentrated. Your thoughts slow down. Your focus deepens. Instead of chasing 10 different goals, you concentrate on the few that truly matter. And concentration produces results. Your actions become more deliberate. Your emotions become more stable. Your confidence becomes quieter, but stronger. This is what the Stoics called inner sovereignty, the ability to govern yourself regardless of what happens around you. Eventually, silence transforms into action. When you stop announcing everything you plan to do, your energy flows directly into the work itself. You wake up, you focus, you execute, you repeat the process tomorrow. Real mastery grows this way, quietly, gradually, almost invisibly at first. Most impressive results appear sudden from the outside, but behind them are years of silent effort, years where nobody was watching, years where discipline existed long before recognition appeared. This is silent execution, and it builds something incredibly valuable: self-respect. The deep internal confidence that comes from knowing you are doing the work even when nobody sees it. Eventually, the transformation becomes clear, not because the world becomes quiet. The world never becomes quiet, but your mind does. Where you once reacted instantly, you pause. Where you once explained yourself endlessly, you remain composed. Your mornings begin with intention. Your focus belongs to your priorities. You protect your attention. And slowly, something powerful begins to happen. Results appear, not because you discovered a secret shortcut, but because your energy is finally directed instead of scattered. You become calmer, more focused, less reactive. And when you speak, people listen, because your words are no longer impulsive. They are deliberate. This is the quiet strength the Stoics admired, the discipline of someone who governs themselves. And it begins with a simple habit: focus on yourself. Stay silent. Let your actions speak. And build a mind that cannot easily be disturbed.